Hey everyone, CPO here, and in this video series, it's all about brakes on the 2019 Golf R. This is particularly important for those of you who are needing to deal with a couple of things that may be unique to this particular vehicle, although it's not specific to this vehicle, but not everybody has it. So for example, my front passenger brake has a wear sensor that has a little wiring harness that gets plugged into the brake pads. The brake pads I'm using don't have that. I'll show you how to deal with that. The other thing is I have an electronic parking brake in this car. So if you have one of those, I'll also show you how to deal with that. There's going to be 3 videos in this series. The first one will be the front brakes, and I'll talk about changing out the pads, rotors. I'll be putting on stainless steel brake lines, and I'll also talk about an important yet sometimes misstep of bedding the brakes. I'm also going to be doing a fluid flush, but that'll be at the end. The second video will be the rear brakes, and we'll walk through the same thing: pads, rotors, brake lines, and then I'll talk about how to deal with that emergency brake. The third video in this series is going to be flushing the brake fluid. I'm going to be changing out the old fluid with new fluid, and it's also going to be part of the bleeding process, which will be necessary if you change the brake lines, which I'm doing, the brake hoses. So even if I wasn't flushing fluid, I'd still need to bleed the brakes. So that video 3 will be important even if you're not doing a full fluid flush. This is video number 2 in the series, rear brakes. All right, everyone, before we get started, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. Look, I'm not a professional mechanic. We're talking about safety system here, brakes. So if you're not 100% comfortable or you don't like the way I do things, please have a professional do it. All right, on this car, the first thing we need to do before we start working on the rear brakes is go into the apps, and in the workshop section, you can do a brake pads replacement. And what that will allow you to do is electronically open up or retract the electronic parking brake on the car. So you activate that, and then it will retract the parking brake so that you're not dealing with the parking brake during the process of replacing your pads. There's going to be a lot of repetition from the first video because brakes on the rear and brakes on the front are very similar, but I will try and point out a few nuances as I see them. But first, obviously, getting the entire car up on stands, or in this case, on the quick jack, and getting the tires off. Now, I do have a spacer there. I'm just going to take that off and set it aside. Like we did in the front, and if you want more details on this little tool, you can see how much wear you have, and we're still got plenty of room on the old brakes, even though I'm changing them. But I am using the Zimmerman rotors and the Ferodo DS 2500 brake pads and StopTech stainless steel lines. And then also, when I get done with this whole thing, I'm going to flush all the fluid and put the RBF 600 from motul. And unlike the front pads, the back pads have 2 different types for each side. So there's the one with the spring goes on the inside, the one without the spring goes on the outside. Again, I'm making sure that I don't have too much fluid in the reservoir and then leaving it loose, because whenever I compress the piston in the caliper, it's going to push some fluid back up into the master cylinder. So removing these clips and getting this spring out of the way, just use a screwdriver. And then there is this these Allen head bolts that we need to remove. I could not get a wrench on the top one because just the brake line was in the way. So I ended up using this Allen head regular wrench to get everything loosened up. And then on the bottom, I could eventually go to a regular ratchet. But these are reusable, so once you remove them, unlike the front, you can clean them and replace them. I really wish I had a lower profile Allen socket. So then that allows us to free up the caliper. And normally I would use something to hang it with, but actually it rests here pretty easily. So then you can just pop the pads out, and yeah, still plenty of room in there, but I am upgrading to higher performance pads, so what the heck. Now, to compress the caliper, you need a special tool. Unlike the front, where a C-clamp would work, this one requires a tool that's going to twist. It's basically, the piston is on a screw, if you will. So you can rent this at the local auto parts store. I get them from AutoZone. You pay $60. They give you the kit. You use it. You take it back. They give you your $60 back. So it's free, but you have to buy it and then return it and get a refund. So you find out which one fits your particular piston, and then screw it into place, and then just basically turn that piston in. And I find tightening up that one nut every little bit of turn for the piston helps keep everything locked into place. But once you've done that, you've compressed the piston. Now it will fit the new pads. I did have to use a crescent wrench to loosen up that nut for the very last time to remove the tool. Now these two carrier bolts are on the back, and I'm looking from underneath the middle of the rear of the vehicle. These are, I think, a triple square 10 millimeter, perhaps. And, getting to the top one from the top side works well. Getting to the bottom one from the bottom side works well. But basically, you're just going to remove these, and then that will allow you to take off this entire caliper carrier bracket. Those are single use. You should replace them after you remove them. So once I've removed the caliper and the caliper carrier, I can take off this little set screw holding the rotor on, and then remove the rotor. Just like that. And then the new rotor can go right on in its place. This is a Zimmerman rotor, so it's got this zinc coating instead of using some sort of an oil or a grease on a machine surface that you have to get rid of. That coating will just wear off whenever you bed the brakes for the first time. And here are the replacement bolts that I'm going to use to put the caliper carrier back on. Again, recommended to replace them. I know a lot of people will use them over again, maybe once, but because this is the first time I've worked on the car and I don't know if they've ever been replaced or not, I'm going to go ahead and freshen them up. And these are stretch bolts, so you're going to set them to a specific torque value, and then you're going to stretch them another 90 degrees. So once I set the torque with a torque wrench, and I'm going to do that both top and bottom, then you have to turn them another 90 degrees. So the issue here is there's not enough room with a breaker bar, which is what you're probably going to need to make this happen. There's not enough room to get the entire 90 degrees in one shot like you can in other areas where you have full range of motion. So the trick to getting the 90 degrees, figuring out how much without just guessing, is you can take a paint pen, which is what I'm using here, a little paint pen, and then just put a dot, and then you can watch that dot, and then as you tighten things up, you can see when you've made 90 degrees of rotation. So that's my little trick for figuring out, because you just don't have a lot of room. So I'm basically just moving it like, I don't know, a few degrees at a time. So rather than having to guess, I can just do it, look and see where that dot is and go, yep, I still need to go more. And I was using this fairly long wrench for a while and eventually had to break out the breaker bar to get that to happen, just because I needed more oomph on that to get the full 90-degree stretch. But once those are done, there is one thing that you're going to need to pull off of your old pads, and that is this shim, this brake pad shim. It's on the outside pad. A lot of people just don't use that. They, throw it away with the pads or whatever. The shim is actually kind of important. It can be argued they help with heat, maybe squeak. I don't know. I'm going to replace it because I know I technically probably should. So take the shim off the old brake pad, put it on the new brake pad, and it should line up just nicely and clip into place. With that done, we can go ahead and clean it up as good as you can, but it was pretty nasty. With that done, we can go ahead and slide our caliper back on. I found that putting the pad inside the caliper first on the inside one worked well, and then having the outside one sort of staged in place, I don't know, it went together really smoothly for me in that regard. You'll see here I don't have the little shim in. That's because I was doing the video and forgot to grab that. So I eventually go get it, which is why you saw that part. But just know you should have a shim in there, and it works exactly the same with the shim. It's a very thin, like millimeter shim. So I did clean these off and then add a little bit of brake grease, high temperature brake grease on these little slider pins, just because anything that has sort of that sliding function, I want to make sure has a little bit of lube. So it's not called out anywhere. Maybe it's not needed. I don't know. But then you can put these, reuse them, and tighten them back down. And I'll put the torque specs up here. And then I marked it for my final torque just to see if they move or not. So with the StopTech brake lines, it comes with everything you need. The banjo bolt, the two copper washers, and then even some replacement caps for your bleed screws. These are really easy, much easier than the front. I probably talked a lot more in the front about this process. So if you want to go look at the fronts, it's exactly the same. We're just doing it on the back side. But I'm loosening up both sides just to make sure that I don't have any issues when I start taking it out. Removing that little clip that's holding everything together. It's the exact same clip that was in the front. And then that allows you to free up that little short line. And then I'm replacing the line. In this case, I'm just basically undoing the entire thing at once. And I'm connecting the hard line that goes to the master cylinder first. And then that will slowly, very slowly fill up with brake fluid as you're getting it installed. So that sort of serves two purposes. One, it doesn't drip everywhere while, so quickly while you're trying to work on it. And two, it actually evacuates almost all of the air. So when it's time to actually bleed the brakes, there's really not a lot of air in there. So it makes that job a little bit quicker. But this is just going to screw on to the same place you just removed the other one from. I mean, replacing brake lines is really sort of a simple process. I just get it snugged down first, and then I'll do the banjo bolt side. The banjo bolt goes the bolt, and then a washer, and then the brake line goes through that hole that you see right there in the brake line, and then another copper washer, and then into the caliper. And it helps if you have all of that stuff ready to go when you start this process, because fluid will start to come out of that hose. And then just be real careful when you're threading this into the caliper that you don't cross thread it, and then just get it tight. It's snug plus like just a little bit. Get everything cleaned up. Don't forget to put your clip back in, and then you should be good to go. And then these plugs, remember that we had removed in the very beginning. Don't forget to put those back in on the caliper. That's really it. Then we can go back into the OBD11 and find our brake pads replacement. And then this time we're just going to choose the close option, and it's going to tighten up the emergency brake. And then I cycle it a few times, and then that's it. So the next thing we're going to do is bleed the brakes, and then eventually we're going to bed the brakes. I talked about brake bedding in great detail in the first video, so go watch that one. I'm not going to recover that, but it's a very important part of the install. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you watch the next video in this series to see the entire process. Remember, there's 3 videos in total: front brakes, rear brakes, and the fluid flush / brake bleeding. So make sure you get whatever info you need. I hope it's helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.